Hello, everyone. Yes. Hello, Sam. And then Ash should be joining on screen in just a moment. Look at this. Look how this all works out. Thank you to the production team who helps make sure that all of this starts so smoothly. So thank you so much, everyone, for who is attending today and everyone who's viewing. My name is Graham Nolan. I am based in Austin, Texas, and I am one of the co-chairs and co-founders of Do the Work. Do the Work is the first national LGBTQ advertising and marketing community in the US. We do so many things to make sure that throughout the year, especially beyond Pride, we're having conversations like these and at conferences and in publications and through data and on social and through mentorship programs that we are connecting the community to make sure that we can elevate LGBTQ creativity, representation, and share a voice in the advertising and marketing industry. I say that so smooth, you could tell I could say it like I say it 100 times a day. So it's very excited to bring the community in so many different together in so many different ways, and especially in conversations like these. So our town hall discussions are all designed to delve into the intricacies of the LGBTQ marketing world and how to make sure that we're included. Because when you do so, when you include our outsized impact on creativity and culture, that leads to business growth, which is going to be a huge thread in our conversation today. We're typically sort of finding that we're diving into like specific aspects of marketing or specific aspects of the LGBTQ community or the larger ally community. So it's nice to dive into these discussions. Today is a very interesting one where we're sort of diving into the way generally that gender plays into branding and how the shaping and intentional strategy around that can lead to business growth. So we'll introduce our amazing speakers in just a moment, but I just sort of want to get into like what the sort of crux of this conversation is, so they can introduce themselves in that context. Basically, I think that a lot of the ways that gender has been discussed in advertising and marketing discussions has been when someone messes up in some way. It's usually about like the way that they sort of project gender stereotypes. And this is even like outside of LGBTQ discussions. This is like which it's obviously related, but I'm talking like Bic pens makes Bic for her. This is an example. We used in an op-ed a couple weeks ago, and this is an old example, but like, for her meant pink and purple pens. And the person who helped me write this piece was just like, I'm sure women were just like, oh my God, thank you. That's what I needed to affirm who I am as a woman, is a purple pen. So, honestly, like the way that we talk about Pride market, LGBTQ marketing gets discussed during Pride, often when someone sort of messes it up. But like, let's sort of be honest about this, which is there are a lot of aspects of society, family bonds, spirituality, class, caste system kind of stuff. It all gets woven into to economics and to marketing, and it all sort of gets sold. We are in a capitalist society, and that means that we barter on a lot of those things. And gender is just one more aspect of that, where we do a lot of self-identification and affirmation based on the things that we buy, right? So it's not necessarily a bad thing. One of the things that I think people need to understand, and it's sort of funny that this is the example I've landed on, and I haven't thought of a better one, but the way that like breast implants are a consumer purchase that you make, where for all of the discussion we're having in the news media about like all this gender conversation is new and it's whatever, and like, why are you trying to sell these products? It's like, well, you've been buying, cis women have been buying breast implants for a really long time, and that's a gender affirmation thing too. So none of these things are necessarily new. It's not new that like there's his and hers shampoo. It might be new that there's a theirs shampoo, but like, let's start to unpack the way, especially as like non-binary and gender fluid perspectives are making their way into more mainstream discussions and platforms, how those ideologies apply to the way that we're marketing, so we're more conscious about this stuff. My therapist always goes like, look, I'm not necessarily worried about what you're doing as long as you know why you're doing it. So that's kind of what this is from a marketing standpoint today, right? And one of the things that I'm very excited about is we have two panelists here, and we originally had three, but all three of the original intended panelists were strategists, which I love. Strategists dive into like everything from like product development to brand experience to the technology that you use to the media space. So we're going to be doing a lot of strategizing around how gender ideas play into how we can change marketing for better business growth. So with that, hopefully not too long-winded introduction, I'm just going to introduce Sam first because Sam is on my screen first. And that's how I always make these decisions. So Sam, if you don't mind sharing your background and your identity as it pertains to this topic.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Graham. I'm Sam Labak. My pronouns are they, them. I am a strategist based in Chicago, an independent brand consultant for the last little bit over a year. So I'm a free agent in that regard. I have worked at agencies in the past, brand consultancies, design studios, uh, tiny market research upstarts, touching various different parts of this industry and my identity as a non-binary person, as a bisexual person, um, has impacted my point of view, certainly, and my work. And I've gotten to bring that to brands across industries. I a quick a quick little story was that I was at a wedding. It was a very um, upper class affair, and one of the straight old white men was asking me about what I did for a living, and when I told him that I consulted for brands, he assumed it was all going to be funky brands. And at the time, I was working on a professional services firm, a law firm, and it blew his mind. And so I love that I've been able to bring that across industries. I'm also currently helping out with Do the Work. These lovely panels, I cast them. So if you're wondering how I got here, I know a person. Uh, but I was really excited to speak on this topic. I'm also very involved with Ladies Who Strategize, which is an organization for women and non-binary strategists, um, where we come together, we talk about strategy. Um, yeah, I serve on the board with that as well. So I'm really excited to have this conversation in what little spare time I have. I'm a stand-up comic. I am a food enthusiast, cooking enthusiast, cat parent, triathlete,
If
and an amateur drag performer as well. But which I did not realize. Well, we'll let Ash introduce himself. I didn't realize that I had booked just drag.
If you tout cat ownership, if any guest touts cat ownership and their cat doesn't walk in the way of the screen during the call, I get very upset. So let's try to orchestrate that as best we can.
At least one of the four will make an appearance.
Perfect. Ash, please tell us about yourself.
Hola, mi gente. My name is Ash Ramirez. My pronouns are they, a, which is Spanish for they, them. And then I also have a neo pronoun, which is papi, P-A-P-I, yes. And that's essentially a noun that's used in place of a pronoun. And I am based in San Antonio, Texas. So I know people are like, oh my gosh, you live in Texas. Um, we're working through it, y'all. We're making the best of what we got. But I am a DEI strategist, employee experience strategist, creative producer. I've been thinking in the DEI lens for a very long time, not only as my lived experience, but within advertising. I've been through MAPE, I've been through the most promising programs, and a lot of those organizations now have completely changed since November recently. Either way, like I've been really working within the ad industry to think about inclusion, not only within the work we create, but also in the places where we create the work. I'm also, Sam kind of alluded to it, I'm also a professional drag king. I'm a non-binary drag king. And my drag king name is Papi Kulo. I'll let you know, translate all that, what that means. But essentially, I've taken that work and I've been doing drag for about 2.5, now going on 3 years. I actually produce drag shows, and I actually just got off the whims of producing a not only a drag festival, but also a festival around community care called Y'all Means All. And that was actually our flags, like, kickoff event for the production house that I started called Poppy Creative Productions, which is again around inclusion, inclusive experiences, particularly from an LGBT plus standpoint, but in a sense, it's inclusion for all.
So I think I was talking to someone this week about how Jimmy Fallon specifically for guests just goes like, huge fan of your work, watched your movie, read your book. Like there's no way you had time to like check out everyone's stuff, but like you are two guests where I've known you for like quite some time and like been privy to all of your creativity and your activities, and I'm so glad that you're bringing them all here. We're incredibly honored. Also, by the way, I've done drag all of once. My drag name is Vijay Abrams. I can't not mention it because it was a gift from someone in Do the Work, and I want to use it again. So, all right. So we're gonna jump into this, and I want to start with what is admittedly sort of like a personal question, but I do, I think that like, purchase decisions are personal, and we're gonna get into like how conscious that is for people. But I did want to ask, what is an existing brand or product that you have intentionally bought, or maybe it was just part of your routine somehow, that makes you feel good about your gender identity? And I'm gonna start with Sam because they raised their hand for this before we got on the air.
Great, thanks. And uh, yeah, there's actually a few examples that come to mind. And I think it's useful to talk about each of them because they serve different roles. Um, the first kind of most obvious ones are both Ulta and Sephora. When I go in there, I see images of people who look like me wearing the makeup. And however those folks identify, it tells me, oh, okay, like someone who looks like me belongs here. Um, it's also every interaction I've ever had with an employee there has been very positive, and seeing employees at these stores, and like clearly there's an effort to make sure that people who are part of the queer community, are part of the trans community, work there, is really neat. And so it's just I always get excited to go look at the pretty pastes and powders, and it's a good time. Um,
By the way, I want to point out how big that is considering that most LGBTQ advertising discussions, a lot of people go to the place of like, oh, do the work. That must be about like making sure that obviously queer people are in commercials and ads. And it's like, clearly that's part of it. But brand experience is so many things. It's everything down to like who you hire and who is the literal face of your brand when you're purchasing. So like that's interesting. That's good.
It is, and it also comes through with product decisions. So another one that consistently makes me feel really good is Old Navy, and they're not actively targeting non-binary folks. They're not like, they've done certain pride things in the past, but it's not like a huge thing that I associate with their brand. But what I do associate with their brand is that's for everyone. And that comes through clearly through their positioning and their messaging, but also in their product lines that makes clothes. I mean, they still have the gendered categories of clothes, but the reality is that I can find things that fit me on any side of the store because they make an effort to have things that are expansive sizes, both in terms of height and width. And so I again am like very excited to go to an Old Navy because I know I can shop the whole store. Um, and so that's really exciting for me too, and that makes me feel really good. And then the last example is not a brand that I'm a customer of, but I'm certainly an advocate for and a champion of, which is Thinks. Um, they they're a great brand, and I remember when they first made the push to be able to advertise on the New York subway in the ways that they needed to have conversations about periods on the subway. And even though I was not the target of those ads, the fact that someone was going and like a brand was going and like pushing, being able to have conversations, different conversations around gender that like we should have been able to have the whole time. And then a year later, when they pushed it further with with targeted products for trans mask people. I was like, again, like the product isn't necessarily for me, but like I see myself included, and that makes me feel really good. And so I will never pass up an opportunity to talk about how much I love that brand.
Reflective of the fact too that like there's all these studies, so after all the studies that said LGBTQ people will buy your stuff if you put if you put us in the ads, which is like there's so many studies on that, then there was the also if you include LGBTQ people, allies and other people will be willing to recommend that stuff, right? So it's just like it's the and the fact that we're still obsessed with word of mouth marketing just shows like that sort of advocacy, even though it's like not for you, it helps you see the world in a certain way, and that's more market than even just the queer people who are in your population. Ash, what products make you feel good?
I think the one that comes to mind even before I like really understood like where I was at with my gender identity was the MasterCard True Name campaign. And so if folks don't know who that like what that was essentially is that MasterCard would give you the ability to put, your correct name that, best fit your gender identity. And for someone, with the process of name changing and gender marker changing, it can be incredibly challenging. It took me before I was able to change my IDs to then change over a card name. It took me about 8 months to do so. And so that being like an alternative option that I could always explore or look into, and the ease of it all was like really affirming. And then also the campaigns that I had saw as they continued to roll out all those things to like just the representation across not only trans folks, but non-binary folks as well too. So I really love seeing that and the diversity and all that. And just already starting like that conversation of like what an option could be for gender affirmation in that capacity. Excuse me. And then one of the ones that I feel like people don't think about is jewelry. So Atomic Gold is a New York City based, and it's actually a queer owned small business jewelry shop, and they're around, gender neutral jewelry, particularly around like engagement rings, right? Get married, like, like for me, I wanted a gender neutral ring, but that still kind of, has some sparkle, has some little pizzazz. And so they were a great one, to like really explore. And then, there were a couple other ones that I think I then found to really find like the one that worked for me. And the other one that also recently came to mind after the holidays, because people buy you gifts and things, and for me, like sometimes I get a little worried with like exactly like what, especially family members, like what they give in a sense. I'm always gonna be like happy about it, like thank you. But one that I was actually really excited about that my sister got me was Salt and Stone, which is very like all natural brand around genderless scents. So it's not like musk, or like something that could be really perceived as like feminine, like vanilla, right? It's around kind of like the moods or even the types of like essential oils or smells that they really pulled into when they were like presenting the product.
One of all of these are fantastic examples, and one of like my favorite things that you said was one of the like the first half sentence you even said, where you said before I quite knew where I was with my gender identity. So it's like really funny. There's brands that we use for affirmation and confirmation, right? So like we used the breast implants example, and we used there's cars certainly where you're just like, I want all y'all to know I made it and this is my car. But like there's also, beyond affirmation brands, there's also exploration brands, right? So the way that you said, like I was still sort of figuring something out about myself, but this brand was the gateway to like help me figure it out, right? It harkens back to the way that like, toys are a very gendered thing, and there's like 1,000 like stories. I think it's really funny. I'm a big nerd, and I've spoken at Comic-Con and stuff like that, and it's just, which is just to say that like I'm in nerd conversations, and the amount of them that say that they use their toys or their action figures kissing as part of it. And like that's at an age where you clearly don't you haven't always made decisions for yourself. Like sometimes early, but sometimes you don't. And like products and brands that have certain gender aspects to them allow you to explore who you are versus like affirm necessarily, right? So That's kind of fun. And I also think that like Ulta is probably something of that too, right? You have an experience where it's like it's affirming for me because I see myself in here, but it's also like I'm in this one aisle that affirms me, and then one aisle over is probably some things I can use to like explore and say why the fuck not, right? So it's pretty fun. So I am sort of curious, like, all right, so I think that you all have examples that are personal to you, and like, again, people have like sort of horror story examples or really badly done examples. How pertinent or prevalent, I guess I would say, do you think gendering is in the world of brands? Do you think it's sort of funny? Like, one of the questions that gets asked about like certain languages is like all the words are gendered. How the hell are we ever going to have like a gender neutral world when like all the brands are gendered? Does it feel like that with products where it's like we have a long way to go because almost every product has been like made for men or made for ladies, and like, or is it actually not as prevalent as you think? There's like a lot of like gender neutral brands out there. What's your just personal take on how pervasive this is?
I can jump in. I don't think to an extent it's done in malice. I think, it's like you said, it's the hard wiring that we have to do to decondition ourselves.
Yeah.
And I feel like now because the conversations around trans and non-binary individuals are coming up, they're more prevalent. It's so funny because I feel like at the festival somebody was like, what does non-binary mean? And somebody was like, dude, it's 2025, like Google it. Like, like
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
there, like, so I think people now are at a moment where they're maybe pausing or like, okay, wait, what? Like, and that's only if I feel like if it's a brand that does have within their values or within their core, like that customer centered experience, right? Like they really do care about it. So they are going to take the time, they're going to take that pause before or while they're developing their product or whatever campaign to really evaluate and ask some deeper questions. And if they don't, or if they're aware, it's kind of leaning on the idea of like laziness, right? It is what it is. It's been this way, and that in itself is a red flag for, future-proofing your products.
Do you think this is a question? I guess what I'm getting to is like, do you think this is a question most brands have to ask themselves? Because shampoo, for example, is a very clear example of like you have to dive into this conversation. Like you said, anyone who's claiming these values, and like if a shampoo company says they want to be inclusive, if the makeup companies and stores we're talking about want to do this, they have to. I'm not sure a bread company does, right?
Right.
Sure. I'm not sure a lot of car companies do. And sometimes there's certainly some cars that do, right? But like not all, right? Do you think that like most brand categories have been gendered in some way to the point where they have to ask themselves this question?
I it's such an interesting question. Like I was thinking about bottled water with regards to this
Okay.
question, because like I think that in categories where like, let's be real, it's water in a bottle. Like you have to differentiate on other terms, like exploring every avenue for how you might be distinctive. And that can come from like planting your flag as a certain gender within the brand. Like think there's value for that. Like look at dude wipes. Um
They're yeah, they're
usually
just they're just wet toilet paper. Why did we gender them?
right. And that's awesome, but it worked. And
Hmm.
and to Ash's point, like I don't think it's malicious a lot of the time. Um the only problem comes in when they're reinforcing like toxic traits. Uh so I think the brands should be asking themselves that question. I think in a lot of cases the answer is like we probably would have like the most authentic, like best identity to reach our target if we use what ends up being a combination of masculine and feminine traits and not really thinking about like, oh, is Unilever a man?
Yeah. Ash, you think most brands are in I think we probably all agree that like every brand pausing to take a second to go like, does this apply to me is a very good thing, right? Or how does this apply to me? But like, do you think that most brands are in a very gendered position already where they really have to like re-examine this to get over some challenges and cater to the future?
I think right now at this moment there's a lot of questions. A lot of things societally are getting brought up that corporations can't like be like, ah, Pat, like, we don't need to talk about that. It's very much in our faces at this point. So I think whether or not they fall into the like if they fall into a gendered category with their product or offering, like I think they're still having the conversation at some point, or or it's really hard to ignore. And even if it doesn't apply, then I still think like there's something to be said about it.
What are okay, so most brands could ask them, ask themselves these questions. Most of them maybe are in strategic brainstorms and bring themselves to a point where they can't ignore this stuff anymore. Um, what are the positive and negative impacts of gendered brands, whether that was, malicious, whether that was just sort of like or intentional, like in a positive way? We just want to help, one gender feel like how they are and the other gender feel like they are and everyone feel like how they are. Like, what are the positive and negative effects of the fact that there are still shampoos for men and for women in certain cars that are marketed to either gender? How's that impacting people?
I can jump in. I think from a trans aspect or lens, when trans men and trans women are really trying to find that affirmation and they lean into, for example, let's say like Fenty. Fenty has been really mindful of women and even expanding to trans women and kind of where that all applies for their product line. I I feel like that type of affirmation and like saying, okay, yes, like this leaning into the femininity or masculinity, because there's multiple, she's offered more than one product. I feel like leaning into those things have been helpful for the trans community. At the same time, though, this is also perpetuating the notion of like passing within our community.
Okay.
Um and like not if you don't look a certain way, or if you're not fitting that checkbox of a trans woman, then are you really a woman, right? Same thing for men. And then it also kind of hurts from a non-binary standpoint, this notion of, well, you don't look non-binary, right? And then you get perpetuated and then put into, again, the binary category because you're not fluid, essentially.
Which is I mean, as you say this, it kind of sounds like, so by the way, this harkens to, I've read a lot of comics written from trans creator perspectives, and a very frequent thing that comes up there is, so I am a trans man and I still want to buy this thing that is considered womanly or girly. And then everyone goes, well, why the fuck did you transition into a man? And then you're still going to buy this woman's product, right? Which it's like funny because like, you know, can assist, like we should all be able to play with this stuff, right? Like we should all be able to experiment. We should all just be able to pick the things that we like in our lives and things like that. So the products are just doing in general what gender does, which is like, sometimes it's good to be affirmed in the binary if you want to be affirmed in the binary, but also don't limit people to the binary, right? Like it's the purchase decisions aren't that different from the general dynamics of what gender does to us, right? Does that make sense?
I think it does. And I absolutely love gendered products for being an expression of either externally or just with myself, knowing that like I bought the Bic pen for ladies and it makes me feel. I didn't, but I do have a purple pencil right here that says gay agenda on it. And it worked. It worked on me. I bought it immediately. But I think it's more about the message, the agenda, what I can do with the pencil, than that it's purple. But I think that like it's it can be useful. It can also be useful in the reality of like, you know, the multivitamin I need to take. Maybe there are benefits to having it match kind of like the expected operating system. I think it's a useful category. Do I wish sometimes that they were using sex categories to describe sex things? Sure. Um, but I understand the point there. And like,
Can you clarify
so
really quick,
yeah.
like because they're, you know, gender and sex for people who like don't speak in this all the time. Like, what do you mean by like the sex labels?
So, thinking about sex, and obviously it's more expansive than just a binary. There's all sorts of diversity and in like actual like sex makeup, but um, it's typically like what you're assigned at birth. We're talking about what the doctor assesses based on like what comes out, what shows up, um, and so like that's the very like for me as like I'm a non-binary person, but like I was, as they say, like assigned male at birth, right? And so like that means that like in some ways like my body is set up to like use testosterone in certain ways to regulate me in a way that it's not set up just like innately to set to like handle estrogen um in those same ways. And so like there is like a physical reality that like as someone who like am not doing any sort of HRT either, like I have to be aware of that when it comes to things like supplements, or even just like implications of like what it means for, and there's obviously a bunch of diversity in it, but like how, like what products are going to work best on my skin. Not to say that like every product that says like men or in my perfect world looking male on it is going to work better for my skin. And I think being trapped in that box gets lesser results. But like it can be useful, or even in the stores that aren't like Old Navy where I know I can shop the whole store. Like the reality is like having that having that department or going into a department store and going to the brands that I know that make clothes for bodies that are more shaped like mine is useful for finding things that fit, not going through like the frustration of just like trying on a bunch of things that don't.
How do you think? So you're we're being very thoughtful about this, and obviously I asked you beforehand, like what products make you feel this way, right? And we're talking about how much intentionality goes into all of these decisions and you know, bringing in markers like, you know, cultural things, biological factors, all these things. But it's really funny because when you have these conversations, if you have them in an advertising perspective, if you have them from a just dinner conversation perspective, I get a lot of, you know, not everyone thinks about this shit that much the way you do. We have to because we're marketers, but there's also a certain amount of muscle memory that plays into this, right? So like, you know, the way I was actually describing it in our prep conversation, that it's just like I got this for a costume. I dyed my hair blonde, and then I was not supposed to wash my hair for 48 hours afterwards. I take a shower after I get my hair done, thinking I cannot wash my hair. I immediately start to rinse it. I go, why the hell did I wet my hair? I was just thinking like that I can't do that. And then so I scold myself, and then I immediately reach for the shampoo. I'm like, what? Stop. What, like their muscle memory and autopilot are very powerful things, even if, you know, even if we think in other ways. So I guess like, you know, we're thinking a lot about this. There's a lot of people who do a lot of exploration with products and things like that. But like, how intentional are most people, do you think, considering all this? They're just getting the shampoo that they always got. Or I'm just getting the one where I just like the smell. Or I don't think about this anymore because I made a decision about a brand 8 years ago and I just never stopped buying it because I just don't want to make more decisions. How much are people thinking about this stuff when they're making purchases?
I also kind of want to jump in on something when it comes to that decision making, right? So
Yeah,
like think about the analogy of like, okay, you gotta use the bathroom. Okay, go to the bathroom and there are two signs on the door. Let's say if a person is AFAB, identifies as a woman, they see two signs on the door. Both of them say men signs, men restroom. Well, I can't use the restroom now because they're both men's restrooms.
yeah.
And then it's that barrier of going to use the restroom, you know, like, and I think it's kind of, and it's like kind of choppy, but in the same way of like, if you go to an aisle and there's only this one gender, a gendered product, and you think that's not for you, then you're not likely to buy it. It's that barrier to purchase that brands can actually take advantage of, right? If you expand and go beyond these gendered products. And so just something to think about when we are figuring out that product development and how we put things in front of consumers.
Yeah, that's a push. It's a push and pull dynamic, right? So I framed the question in terms of like, what brands are sort of pulling you in, but like the way that you're framing it feels like, what brands are pushing people away unnecessarily when they could be like cashing in more market share, right?
Mhm.
And it's sort of funny because like you mentioned the toilet situation, which is like one of the things I would like to think the least about in the world, period, and most people would. And like Sam, you brought up the idea earlier that water is the same way, and yet to differentiate yourself in a market where, like there's 1,000 different water bottle brands, like maybe the way that I chose to do that is by becoming the one for the water bottle for women, right? But then I go into the grocery store, I only see the water for women, and I'm just like, all I wanted to do is buy water without thinking about it. And now I'm thinking about it because it feels like none of these, you're just telling me they're not for me, even though it's just water, right? Like these are the weird dynamics of this. But yeah, but not to derail, and any other thoughts in general about like how much people are actually consciously thinking about this stuff when they're deciding what to buy?
I think that example you just brought up where, oh no, it's just the women's water. What am I going to do? Even though it was, somewhat facetious. First, love any opportunity where a cis person has to question their gender. So we should absolutely, maybe we should gender all products, but each product only one way.
I
No, but
didn't think
I
gender all products was going to be the call to action after
Oh
this.
my gosh.
yes, more gender in products.
Cool.
But no, I think that people actively, I think that like I actively think about it. Like I think that like we as I don't even know if it's just we as marketers, but we as like queer people who, whether or not we are like non-binary or like cis queer folks also experience like gay men experience misogyny, right? Like that's a thing that happens. And so like getting the girly water could be like really scary based on like that history. So that's absolutely like a valid part of it to consider. And we do have a lot more in common than we have that separates us. But it's I think people think about it when their preferred brand isn't there. I think that's a great example. And I think that people really do it subconsciously. I think that is the big thing is like it's not even that it's like this is my preferred brand. It was just that like I know the blue packaging is for me or I know the pink packaging is for me. Um, and they don't have to think about it, and that's a privilege
Mhm.
to not have to consider it.
Yeah.
Yes.
I even wanted to jump in on that too because it's like every day when I have to go to the grocery store, when I have to go to the grocery store and it's menstruation week or whatever, and I gotta go get some menstruation thing, items, I had to prepare myself to like go and look a certain way in out of a sense of safety, out of sense of safety and um comfort and or in a sense of like okay the people aren't gonna like clock me if I'm in like the aisle trying to get some products and they're already categorized, right? It says like above in that aisle, feminine care products. And
Yeah.
and they see me and I got a whole beard and they're like, who? And I do get the double takes and I kind of have to be like, okay, and then it's like so weird because I'm AFAB, right? And I'm just like, y'all, this is like I am not taking any tea. This is all natural, honey. Like, like uh and it's just like yeah to have that kind of stress to just go and get something that I need that happens to me every month is like oh, that's I really hope a brand wouldn't want like a customer to feel that way. Like imagine if you were that one brand in that aisle that didn't have to make me feel that way, or maybe there was a different way of presenting it and it didn't and it wasn't even in that aisle, right? Or there's more conversations to be had around that customer experience that we're not having outside of that product too. And Graham, you had mentioned it already, and Sam, you talked about it with Ulta, right? Like it's that feeling of affirmed, but also again like feeling like, oh, okay, I'm not gonna have to deal with like some people today, and actually have a good day.
Well, this is also, one of my favorite things, one of my favorite examples of like, so what people who don't work in advertising don't know is that there's the difference between creative and media agencies, right? One of my favorite examples always of like what the purpose of that is that there's Procter and Gamble. This is the example I was given back in the day, is that you have brands like Procter and Gamble who built like billion-dollar empires on having put out brands with television commercials, right? So it's commercial, commercial, commercial. And throughout the 80s, even as like a young cis boy, seeing so many commercials about maxi pads. And they were just on. I watched a lot of soap operas, a lot of General Hospital. So maybe I was accidentally just part like immersing myself in this. But like, you know, if you grew up in the 80s, you remember the commercial with the pad and the pitcher of blue water that you poured into the pad to show that it could absorb like an entire gallon of water. And it's just like, this is what am I watching? But like, and it's funny because, you know, the way that the things worked is you'd sort of go, the creative agency said, this is the story we have to tell is about the, you know, about the containment and the flow and things like that. So this is the commercial we make. And so the media agency has to buy the commercial until there was a shift whereby the media team said, stop doing this because we've done research about media first. And we researched and we found out that like people do not want, not only do like young cis boys not want to watch because they don't know what these products are, but also women don't want to watch these in rooms, you know, or you know, people who have periods don't want to watch these in rooms with their mom and their father and their brother. And so like we're going to tell you that like, you know, you should invest in magazines because magazines are where people are going for, you know, for private information. Like they're going to Cosmo for like, here's 50 different tips about how to like, you know, manage your period and stuff like that. So I bring this up in the context of like, you're bringing up a media insight, right? For people who have to, where the product category forces them to make very conscious decisions. Like I'm thinking like if I was in your position, I'm just going to buy all this shit online, right? Like I don't want to get dressed up to the store. I want these decisions to be more thoughtless. I want them to be more subconscious. So I'm just going to subscribe to the Amazon for lack of a better alternative, like auto subscribe on these products. And so it becomes about channel strategy in this way, right? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm not reading that wrong. That's immediately where I go. I'm like, I never want to deal with that. The same way that, like, you know, it's really funny. I'm reading the comic book Heartstopper. This poor kid has to buy his first condoms. His friends drag him into the store to buy condoms, and I'm just like, buy them online, man. You know, it's sort of funny.
Yeah, I think it's also just like considering it's yes and, right? That's partially it, but then I think you have to couple it with a couple of like the ethical question consumer decisions that are being brought up now, especially from like a Gen Z standpoint. Like they're looking for like 24, what is it, over 20% of Gen Z is like LGBT plus slash gender expansive, and they do care about like ethical brands. So it's like the slight divestment of certain brands or like how you get those things and kind of I think that's kind of like where you put your money and how it goes to as part of that conversation.
Yeah. Um, and yeah, that's sort of like next generation stuff. It's like marketers are always obsessed with like youth marketing theoretically, but like in this place, they're sort of stopping and they're going like, well, and this actually sort of segues neatly to the next question, actually, is like a lot of people go, well, you know, while we want to cater to youth and we want to cater to the future, this feels political, right? Like just saying the word diversity in a meeting now in 2025, it's like, wait, are politics going to get into this? And it's not inherently political, right? Spirituality isn't necessarily political. Your economics position might be a little bit more inherently political, but a lot of this is about like, you know, I don't consider it political. I just want to buy a pen. I just want to buy, you know, a period product, you know, solution, a hygiene product without having to think about it so much. But you're going to be in rooms where people are going to tell you, we don't want to get political with this stuff in the way that we're discussing gender. How do you ground them in the fact that it's not about politics, it's about personal decisions and it's about business growth?
Yeah. Go ahead, Sam.
It's such, thanks. That's the big question, isn't it? And I'm kind of two minds about it.
Okay.
On the one hand, you know, it's reality. your consumers are people, and for the most part, people have gender. Um, and so like I think that in that instance, it's twofold. One is like showing them that they're already doing it, because like it's really ridiculous for any brand that's doing marketing to suggest that they're not already engaging in gendered conversations, even if it's not that they're a super gendered brand or whatever. But it's like, you made that campaign for women. What do you think that campaign was? Um,
And by the way, the brief always has a gender demographic on it, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, even if it's like we want to target all genders, that yes, that is still there, right? Like that's a category you're thinking about. Um, So on the one hand, and then that's the little kind of like comedy trick of like you illustrate how kind of like absurd something that's just been said is, in order for them to for in order for the truth to be undeniable, which is that we're already talking about gender. Like it's
Okay.
happening in this room, it's happening with our audiences. Um, and then the other mind, and this is, I be political. Like I think that brands are for like the best brands are for their audiences, but they're also like, in order for them to be really distinctive, they're not for someone too. Not necessarily in an exclusionary way, but like in order for them to really be distinctive and stand out, like they have to stand for something and against something. And that thing can be political, and like that's not going to work for every business, but like it's going to work for some. And if 20% of Gen Z is queer, and like a brand wants to go all in, unless they're trying to get like 95% of market share or something, which like most brands are not doing that. Um, Having a strong point of view is a good way to be distinctive. It is a good way to show your values and like go through. And then you're not just doing the thing that like we're critical of brands doing every year during Pride, where it's like, cool, you like slapped a rainbow on it and threw queer people in the commercial, but you're not really doing anything. Um, you know, Encouraging them to actually take the leap for their consumers, who have to live in a world where corporations have power, brands have power, and they're creating communications, um,
Yeah.
is a worthwhile thing to do.
All of this goes back to these are let's acknowledge that these are practices we've carried out forever. The water bottle thing is a great example too, because it's like, well, we're not going to get political, or we're not going to be about a lifestyle. It's like so many brands, the less product differentiation you have in terms of features, the more you just had to say that you stand for something. And if you stood for softness, then you didn't stand for hardness.
Right.
That's but like, by the way, in both genders and beyond those genders, there is softness. So like, let's double down on this stuff, right? Ash, how would you welcome people into this discussion if they were nervous that they were getting political with it?
Yeah, I think it's the conversation, and I would even say people are nervous around the word inclusion, right? Too, if you're like trying to dovetail all that together. For me, it's access, right? So and really thinking about your product, like how can this product be marketed to all genders, or how can it be accessible to everyone, right? What is this product essentially filling for anyone? And if you can have that conversation, again, you're really opening yourself up for some strategic business growth opportunities. And you touched on this earlier, Graham, about gender affirmation being for everybody, right? It also is coupled with gender expression, right? How people just like present themselves. If you are, identify as a man and you have long hair, which is, seen as a feminine feature, right? Like, how does that all work together with like if you're trying to, sell a product, a men's shampoo, right? Like, I think all those things get a little dicey the more that you continue to gender and like try to fit these characteristics or these attributes into these two categories. You're limiting yourself, and it is going to hurt you in the long run. So and so it's not only the expression standpoint, but if you can really think beyond uh and depoliticize what gender affirmation means and expression means, you actually like benefit it. You're creating an opportunity for it to benefit everybody, and go beyond that assumptions and actually push beyond a lot of stereotypical gender stereotypes that are also perpetuated.
Yeah, a certain degree of like, what do you like, the ability to sort of go like, I don't mean to like be reductive, but it's like a certain amount of like, what do you care? Someone who's buying it as long as they're buying it, right? And just sort of like making that a part of it. It's sort of funny. The way you're talking about it reminds me of, I want to say it was a Gap product, right? Where it was like, I feel like a couple brands have done this where it's just like, so you have a certain shirt and then it's made, it's made for men. And then you've got like the woman who doesn't care and she kind of likes to wear her boyfriend's shirt. So like, didn't Gap make like the boyfriend shirt, but then like market it towards women, right? So it's like, it's that kind of thinking, right? It's just like, there's both the what do I care who's buying it, but also if I know that you're buying it, I'm also going to like say hi to you. And I'm also going to like make the product because it's about shape. It's about a shape and a cut of the shirt and make this for you, right? So it's like that's a good innovation, right?
Yeah, I think really if brands can evaluate their products of and lean into the fit, the style, the need, or the function over the gender identity, I mean that you're growing, you're already doing well.
You go. Um, so we're running out of time here. I do want to make sure I ask you both one more question, which is, and this is kind of like it ties back to the first question. So the first question was about like what is the existing product where you're just like, I buy this because this makes me feel good about how I see gender or how I experience gender. But like, what's the wish list? What's the category where you're just like, if this car company, if this soap company, if this tech company could get this right, I would buy the hell out of this and they would make so much money. What's the category and or the brand where you're just like, I just want you to do this.
I'm ready.
Yeah, what do we
I hope they call me.
got? Okay, what do we got?
Um,
It's time for the pitch.
Nike or Adidas,
Okay.
gender neutral shoe sizes. A man's shoe, the smallest you can get for a man's shoe is a size 6, which translates to a women's 7.5. So if you are able to expand those same designs for all feet sizes, which people don't think that that's like that can translate, I really think that there's something there that people are missing.
Yeah. I've heard it's so funny. I've heard about this in the terms of like the extra large, like the lettered sizes, but not in terms of like the numerical sizes for shoes. It's just like why not have them available in those sizes and then people can buy more.
Yeah. I often look like for men's shoes, I'm like, oh, can't do it. I have to-
Your lost profits, Adidas. All right. So what do you have, Sam?
Well, other than them making the pretty designs of Doc Martens in the bigger sizes, which is also a problem. Um, I would love to see like Essie move in a more gender neutral direction. We obviously we have more um men, and then also obviously like non-binary people are down to wear nail polish, and it's a real audience with a real need that's buying the product. We should address it. And I particularly like those visible examples, those expression examples, just because I feel like seeing people um who are deviating from like those social expectations, like when I see a dude with nail polish, I don't inherently think this is a dangerous person. And so I think creating opportunities to create a safer world for people who are willing to be more thoughtful about their gender, and just like as a way to like show some allyship and signal that they're safe people is a good thing.
I love all of these examples so much because they really aren't, not once have you said, well, if you put this flag on something, it's like, you're talking about Sam, you're talking about a product category where narrative and representation are the thing, and you also used how that translated to retail, but then that sort of segued into like customer service experience. And Ash, again, like we sort of foreshadowed this, but you went directly to a thing where it's like, I'm not even that concerned with the narrative so much as like you are manufacturing in a different way and like doing product development in a different way. So like, I think that my big shout out to anyone watching this is just like none of this is what you assume about like, the marketing of this stuff. It's so many, there's so many different ranges. It's media, it's digital purchase versus in-person purchase, and it's a whole world of possibility. I hope that more people engage y'all brilliant strategists on how to make this happen for their brands. I do want to ask, Sam, I'll go to you first just because, no, I'm going to go to Ash because I see Sam first. Ash, any last message for people on what they should sort of take home about this and how can people reach you to talk about it more?
Yeah. First off, thank y'all. Do the work for having me. I think the biggest takeaway is just pause and reflect. Do your due diligence of the work of really looking into like, I say the more basic level of like what non-binary means or like what transgender means, really get into a lot of those questions. And also, yeah, I would take the time to do your like really assess your product development, and again, ask yourself where are we really prohibiting access? Where are some barriers that we can actually remove? You can follow me at Poppy Creative Productions, also LinkedIn, Ash Ramirez. And if you'd like to work with us, poppycreativeproductions.com contact form, and we'd love to get in contact and partner. Thank you.
Fantastic. And thank you for you're presenting such a nice invitation for people. I love the idea of like, being a barrier lifter. We talk so much about like targeting and all this stuff, but like just make life simple for people. It's so nice. Sam, what do you got to send people off on?
Um, this has been a great chat. Thank you so much. I think that I would encourage brands to be bold, to be thoughtful, like what Ash said, as well. And really, I think from the start, thinking about things at the brand level, thinking about things even at the research level, and bringing in knowledgeable folks to help create your research, create your brands who are aware of this, so you don't end up with a bunch of research that already has that bias in it by the time it comes to putting together your positioning. Um, so far as where you can find me, I I am on the LinkedIn. I also will shout out I am on the YouTube at the Holland Tunnel. That is where my drag queen cooking show is, which you know is a whole lot of fun. So gotta plug that. But anyway, yeah, thank you. Reach out.
We established on the pre-pro that I can't cook, so everyone should take your cooking advice. I also, again, am so grateful for you sharing your perspectives, and I can't. it- It's a coincidence that we have strategists in this discussion. However, I do think, like, not to be reductive again, that like this is a strategy year. I'm not sure this is the year where like everyone's like, the marketers are being so quiet. I think if they make the kind of decisions that you're enforcing, it will lead to like subsequent years where like they are announcing things that are actually meaningful. So the kind of stuff you're talking about, I think, is like the true answer to a lot of the stuff versus focusing on like casting and things later down in the process. So it all has a place, but I think this is particularly important. And you showed how this is stuff that people can access. To borrow your word, Ash, without feeling, there's ways for everyone to play in this. So thank you for illustrating it. I'm Graham Nolan on LinkedIn. You could find Do the Work at DOTHEWERQ on Instagram and on LinkedIn. And you can email me at grahamnolan@gmail.com if you want to connect with any of the folks and you missed their information, or if you want to get involved and do the work at its mission. Thank you so much for everyone who's here. Thanks for everyone who's watching. Thank you to our amazing and genius guests for being part of this conversation and making it possible. And we will see you all soon. Later.